Hi. It's almost time to start. I want to welcome you to our Case Against Sugar, another webinar by our team Ocean Rock. Today I'm your presenter, Dr. Famous. And what I want you to all know, because some of you will be listening to the recording, so I'll pretend you're listening to me now, is that here at Ocean Rock, we truly believe that people just need the right information so that they can make powerful change. You just need to know what to do so that you can do it. Most people are capable of transforming their lives and living a very optimal, healthy life. Okay. I won't wait too much longer to start the presentation. So I'll actually start with a story, and this story actually has to do with how I found out how magically food can transform your health. When I was in my second year of medical school, I woke up one morning and I had extreme numbness. I felt like I couldn't get up and walk. And it scared me. It didn't last for long, but I knew something was wrong. So I headed to the doctor, and when he worked me up and I got sent for ultrasounds, etc., he told me that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome, which, okay, as a medical student, I, went home and Dr. Googled that. And what I learned when I Googled my condition that I was diagnosed with, I found that there was a certain way that these people present. People with PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, they actually present with possibly being overweight or obese, maybe having prediabetes or diabetes or insulin resistant, hirsutism. Man, all of these presentations, they didn't match me. And of course I got sent home with some diabetes controlling drugs, but my blood sugars weren't high, so it all didn't make sense to me. And I decided to do a little bit of my own research, like any good medical student, right? So here I am in my second year of medical school and start Googling ways to treat PCOS without medication. And what I found was that most people could deal with that condition with food. And of course that confused me because I just went to the doctor and he gave me a big diagnosis and some medications, but he didn't tell me anything about food. So through my research, I decided that I wouldn't take the meds, and that scared me a little bit because, I woke up that morning and I felt like I couldn't walk. So it's pretty scary to not take your doctor's advice sometimes, but I did it anyway. I cleaned up my diet, and you know what you need to know before that, before I say what I did with my diet, is that if you would have asked me, I would have easily told you I had a healthy diet. I didn't drink sugary drinks. I didn't eat candy. I'm not a dessert kind of girl. I know many are, but I wasn't. And I just didn't feel like I had this huge unhealthy diet. I ate my vegetables and I drank my water. So in understanding how I can reverse this condition, PCOS, with my diet, I learned that, maybe my plant intake wasn't high enough, and a lot of my foods, although they were minimally processed, they were still, some packaged foods, and they weren't mostly foods that I made. So I wasn't always aware of everything that was in it. But by cleaning up my diet and participating and creating what's called a whole foods diet, I was able to completely reverse that condition without the medications. Of course, I went back to the doctor to check on that because, well, it was scary, right? He sent me home with medications and I didn't take them, so I needed to make sure I was gonna do a good job. All of that to say that when I went back for my checkup, it was perfectly fine. Just as before, my blood sugars were normal, the ultrasound was clear, I had no issues, but I also was feeling better and sleeping better, and I had more energy. I didn't have to take away sugar in the sense that we always think of it, but by cleaning up my diet, I got rid of a lot of sugar. And that's today's topic. It's the case against sugar. And we will start now because we have quite a few people have joined now, and I'll get started with the slides so that we can end on time. And those who may have joined later, they can go back and listen to the recording of the slides that they have missed. So thank you for joining us. Once again, I just want to say welcome. This is our opportunity to share with you basic facts that can help you transform your health. Okay. So we'll do a quick intro to sugar. And when I say quick, what I really mean is that I want to give you some facts and a little bit of science. Because to really understand the effects that sugar has, you really do need to understand just a tiny bit of biochemistry. And I promise you, it's not going to feel like you went back to school. We'll spend most of our time talking about the effects that sugar has on all of the body's systems. We'll talk about sugar addiction a little bit and what that really means, because we use that word addiction a little bit loosely. We'll talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, the different kinds, the kinds that we should avoid, and the kinds that we should try. A simple solution, actually, when it comes to diet, and then how Ocean Rock Wellness can support you, and maybe if we have time, or if we're able to operate the whole chats with questions, we'll do it that way. And if we don't have time, we'll accept all questions through Facebook, and we'll try to answer them that way. So sugar, what's the drama? So sugar comes in many forms, like outside of that powdery white stuff that we see on the screen. And the obvious ones are desserts and beverages. But the reality is a lot of the sugar that you consume or may consume actually is hidden, or it's in words you can't pronounce or can't recognize as sugar. And that's some of the facts that can confuse people. But what's even more confusing is that the health industry in itself, you hear 1 minute it's okay to have sugar in moderation, the next minute, oh, your body's not designed to have any sugar at all. You may hear that sugar-free is the way to go, or even more confusing, you hear that, oh no, you need to avoid all artificial sugars because they're just sometimes worse than sugar, and you may as well just have sugar. You need sugar for energy, or sugar's addictive. The onslaught of what you may hear about sugar and the effects on the system and what you should do, whether you should have or limit or use an alternative, can be very confusing. All of this comes down to one thing. We are definitely consuming way more sugar in our diets than we ever have. And whilst we don't have our own statistics, and at least one of you I know for sure is listening from America, and but most of us are here in Bermuda, the reality is, whilst we may not have our sugar statistics, we do know for a fact that our statistics mirror those of the United States, if not are worse, when it comes to things that relate to sugar, such as diabetes and obesity. So I'll give you some history. In the 1800s, they found that the average consumption of sugar in the United States was 46 pounds of sugar. Now, many of you know what a 5-pound bag of sugar looks like. Someone may have sent you to the store for it once. Someone else, I'm sure. Or you've seen it in the grocery. A 5-pound bag of sugar is all that people were consuming for an entire year in the 1800s. That number rose significantly in the 1900s to a whopping 90 pounds of sugar. That's a extreme amount. Per person, 90 pounds of sugar per year. But here we are today, and I have to tell you that the number that the average American consumes in sugar is 150 to 170. That's a big range and a large amount of sugar. And you're probably thinking to me that that is ridiculously excessive, and that's a lot of sugar. I agree. Let me help you figure out what that equation means. So if a person is having 150 to 170 pounds of sugar a year in teaspoons, well, let's go first 2 pounds. That's about half to a quarter to a half of a pound of sugar, yep, a day. So in teaspoons, I'll tell you what that sounds like. 30 to 60, yep, 30 to 60 teaspoons of sugar every day is what the average American is consuming. And this is the thing. People aren't going around putting 30 teaspoons of sugar in their tea, or, putting 20 teaspoons of sugar in their hot cereal. A lot of this sugar is kind of hidden. Yes, we may be consuming sugary drinks, etc., but there are foods that we're eating every day that has sugar hidden, just outright hidden, with words that you won't be able to tell. But I'll tell you what some of those foods are. The sugar hide and seek game. The number one on topic is on the screen as we speak. That is tomato ketchup, tomato sauces, marinades, etc. So I'll list off some of the others. Imagine having a salad and then not realizing you're taking a heavy dosing of sugar with it. So a lot of salad dressings, of course, canned fruits, that one's kind of obvious. Protein bars, right? And granola bars, something you think is a healthier choice, it's going to do a body good. It's normally laced and loaded with sugar, and a lot of times not using the word sugar so that it's outright noticeable to you. But anything in a package, really, crackers, even oatmeals, frozen and prepared foods, especially things in cans or bottled, they're gonna have a fair amount of sugar. This list doesn't include, like I mentioned, the obvious things like cookies and sugary drinks. These are the hidden forms of sugar. So I keep mentioning these other names for sugar, and that's what I want to list off for you, so that you kind of have an idea. Instead of the word sugar, you actually may see dextrose, maltose, corn syrup, corn sweetener, high fructose corn syrup, rice malt, sorghum syrup. I mean, this list, let's see, agave, carbitol, evaporated cane juice is my favorite because it actually sounds like it's not so bad, but it's totally sugar. Even nectars, so you might see peach nectar. It really does mean peach with sugar or peach puree with sugar. So as I'm sure you would guess, this is not a complete list, but what you want to look out for are words that end in oses, like dextrose and maltose, because those are outright chemical names for sugar. What's the big deal anyway? So the big deal really is not that, so you might say to me, hey, sugar's in everything we eat. Why isn't everybody sick from it? Well, it's because a lot of the ways that sugar contributes to poor health, it's not noticeable right away. It's not something that you say, you get a diagnosis and you say, oh, that's from sugar. It's actually that sugar contributes to things that are more chronic, such as diabetes and heart disease, and truthfully, even things like mental and behavioral problems, allergies, arthritis. Let me dig a little bit deeper for this list. So if you got migraines, people are going to start looking to your environment, your stress levels, even medications or drugs that you may be on, and looking for an interaction there. People don't always direct you to your food journal to figure out exactly, well, is it something you're eating? When it comes to big scary things like autoimmune diseases or cancer and diabetes, although sugar contributes heavily to all of those, the first thing that we do is not check your diet. Sometimes those things are so big and scary that we just get straight to it and we start to, diagnose and medicate. But that's the difference. That's why it's important. If you change your diet, you can change your life and reverse disease. And every day there's more and more research that shows how sugar contributes to these chronic diseases. So let's start with the Sugar 101. It's like your 5-second biochemistry course. Luckily, you get to skip medical school, and I'm just going to give you a briefing. So to best understand how dangerous sugar really can be, you really need to know what it's made of. And let's pretend we're talking about the powdery white stuff, right? It's literally two molecules two sugar molecules joined together to create that sugar that we know. One of those molecules are glucose, and the other is fructose. Now, glucose, it is outright an energy source needed by the body. We utilize it, our body uses it, and guess what? If you didn't eat any, your body would actually make some. Fructose, on the other hand, which comes along, remember glucose and fructose actually is not important to our bodies. We make very minimal amount of it, and we don't have a huge physiological need for it. And fructose actually, because it comes along every time we have glucose, if we're actually consuming a lot of it, fructose becomes a burden. So let's move that into insulin. So this is the other part of your science lesson. Insulin and sugar resistance has been insulin resistance and sugar intake has been a huge topic. And what you need to understand is, sorry, I thought I messed with the screen. What you need to understand about insulin is that our body produces it to help to regulate our blood sugar and provide a way to send glucose, our energy source, into our cells for use for energy purposes, right? So let me explain to you, when you have a meal, what we're aiming to do always in our body is keep things at a normal level. So if this is our blood sugar, we want to keep it here at normal. When you have a meal that contains sugar or foods that will break down into sugar, like carbohydrates, right? Our oats, our rice, our wheat, our bread, our crackers, all of those things eventually do get broken down into glucose. What that does is spike our blood sugar levels. That spike is an indicator for the pancreas to pump out some insulin. We have blood sugar levels that are increased. The pancreas pumps out insulin to say, get that blood sugar back down, and it drives the glucose into our cells, like our muscle cells, for use for energy. What happens though is we end up eating again, right? We do it all day. So 10 o'clock, your breakfast kind of runs out. It's time for a snack. We do this again, up, 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 blood sugar goes. And then again, our pancreas pumps out insulin. And that insulin helps our blood sugar to go down. And we do that at every meal that contains sugar. We're having these, what we call blood sugar spikes, right? And of course, everybody does it. We do it from birth till adulthood. However, if you're spiking your blood sugar all the time and the pancreas is constantly pumping out insulin, what happens is that the cells start to say, you know what, she's always pumping out insulin. Maybe we'll just ignore that. Maybe if she puts out a bigger signal, then we'll respond. And so the pancreas is working really hard. It pumps out even more insulin to get you to drive that blood glucose into the cells to reduce the blood sugar levels. And this roller coaster ride and excessive insulin, that's what we call insulin resistance. When those cells require a lot more insulin to respond, that's called insulin resistance. It still works, but the pancreas is working overtime to pump out enough insulin to make that work. Over time, though, what that means is you would have had very high insulin levels, and that is a problem. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So let's weigh out the consequences, right, of eating that slice of yummy chocolate cake. But no, really, what we need to know, and I think most people know this and understand that sugar intake has an effect on obesity, right? I think most people make that connection, and it's easy to understand, but obesity is a serious epidemic, not just here in Bermuda, but worldwide in most developed countries. Sugar's role in weight gain is that it's not just us adding empty calories into our diet, it's really, sorry, let me mute. It's really that when you eat more sugar, instead of you feeling satisfied, it actually messes with the hormones that make you feel like, okay, I'm okay, I don't need to eat anymore. And when you break that cycle, that brain response that I'm full, I'm done, I can stop, you end up overeating. And then we have that whole cascade of things I just spoke about: high blood glucose levels, high insulin output, insulin resistance, and this excess ends up contributing to obesity and the occurrence of obesity. It's important to know that weight gain from sugar is actually often present in the abdominal area. And the reason that's a problem is because abdominal fat has an further effect on cardiovascular risk and increases your cardiovascular disease risk, okay? So we've just kind of gone down the chain of command of how sugar affects insulin affecting obesity, and the long-term effects of obesity and cardiovascular disease. Oops. Okay, so we'll talk about the liver a little bit. I mentioned to you we're going to kind of go through all the body systems and have a good understanding of how sugar is affecting each and every one of them. And we can see that over time, all of those things are compounding and we're really being affected severely. So remember I spoke to you about fructose, and I'm sorry for those of you who are joining us late. Fructose is part of the biochemical makeup of sugar. We have a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule. Glucose we have use for, we can put it into our cells for use for energy, but fructose, not so much. So that has to get dealt with by the liver. It wouldn't be a problem, right, if we weren't having a lot of sugar, because the liver can process, tiny bits of fructose at a time. What it does is store that fructose, it turns it into glycogen and keeps it stored in case we need some energy stores later. The problem is we're over consuming sugar, and the liver's like, hey, I kind of already processed all the fructose to glycogen that I could. What am I going to do with all this extra? I'll store it as fat, as this long-term energy source. But it doesn't store it anywhere. It stores it right there in the organ. And this is what you may have heard is considered non-alcoholic fatty liver. And why non-alcoholic? Because they had seen that an alcoholic over time would end up with a huge fatty liver. It becomes poor in function and it affects their health in the long term. Sugar in excessive amounts is doing exactly that, but there's no alcohol involved. What's happening is the liver has to deal with all of this overconsumption of sugar that we have, and it decides to store it as fat because that's all it knows how to do. And now we have this huge fatty liver that's not going to be functioning as well as it should, and therefore sugar can be just as damaging to our liver as alcohol, right? And there are studies that actually support that. And this is even if you're a healthy weight. So you might, look and fit your BMI, at your physical every year. But if your liver is fatty, and the only way to figure that out is to get a visceral fat reading, like on a body composition, similar to what we do here at Ocean Rock. But once you have a fatty liver, you can be sure that you're going to start reaping the poor negative health effects of that. So let's move on and talk about the heart. Keeping your heart healthy, right? It's important. We know that cardiovascular disease is one of the major killers. And believe it or not, there was a war on fat because we thought that, cholesterol was causing heart disease. And you know what? Let's make it clear. Saturated fat is not the culprit, but sugar is. Let me explain a little bit to you about, oops, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. So the studies show that having that large amount of fructose can actually cause an outright rise in that bad cholesterol, right? We all hear our good and bad cholesterol, and we always attributed that to the amount of fat in our diet. or how much we were maybe exercising. But the reality is that sugar has an outright effect on increasing your bad or LDL cholesterol, right? It also has an effect, of course, like we mentioned before, your blood glucose levels, your insulin levels, right? High insulin and abdominal obesity, just as I mentioned before. All of those things are major risk factors for heart health and developing heart disease. So that's the heart wrapped. We have to be careful of our sugar intake if we're going to keep our heart healthy. So what does sugar have to do with immunity? I love this one. Like I said, this is all about sharing information that you may not have heard before. Some of what I said earlier may be very common knowledge, but sugar and your immunity. So if you don't know what immunity is, it's your body's ability to fight disease. And the thing that the cells that help us do that are our white blood cells. So your entire immune system kind of relies on them and relies on their functioning. Well, in studies, they have been able to find that 100 grams, well, let's talk teaspoons, 24 teaspoons of sugar can make your white blood cells 40% less efficient in killing germs and fighting disease. On top of that, your body is going to be stressed and irritated, but however, these effects, like, so you have sugar, it affects your white blood cells, it makes them work less efficiently, and guess what? That effect lasts for 5 hours. Normally, most people go like 2 sugar doses in less than 5 hours. So we're having like continuous depressed immunity by our sugar, just because of our sugar intake. Okay, and we need those white blood cells working well to fight off disease, to kill off possible cancer cells. Like we need our immunity for so many reasons. Okay, so that was like a prelude. My cancer slide is next. So caution with cancer. It's hard to sometimes believe that something so prevalent in our diet has an effect on something so tremendous and life-changing for people and families, right? Cancer is this big, scary disease that many families, many people have had to deal with. What we like to think, or like in our minds, I feel like most people feel like, you know, when we talk cancer, we're talking cancer risk because of genes, and we love to explain. And you will hear us maybe in our book or on other podcasts, etc., explaining that genes are just a loaded gun, right? A gun with, you know, bullets. But what really pulls the trigger on the genes is like the environment of the body. What you do on a daily basis, what the body has to deal with on a daily basis, really is what affects whether or not genes are turned on or off. And so when it comes to cancer, I should explain maybe just simply what cancer cells are. They are uncontrolled cells that are undergoing uncontrolled growth and multiplication, right? It is one of the leading causes of death worldwide, and it's traumatic. However, what we need to understand is our environment, this body and the environment we create in it based on everything we do, whether or not we get enough sleep, whether or not we have enough nutrients, a nutrient-dense diet, or whether or not we're drinking enough water. All of these things play a role in creating the environment that our body and our cells are bathed in. And sugar has, and what this has to do with sugar, Dr. Famous, it's that sugar creates that whole insulin response. We spoke about it before. Sugar causes insulin to be pumped out so that our body can deal with that huge glycogen response, pack it away, and use it for energy in our cells. If we're pumping out lots of insulin, that insulin becomes part of this environment, our body. And it is has been shown that insulin is one of the hormones that actually contribute to the regulation of those cancer cells. What I'd like you to remember is that consuming sugar raises your insulin, and insulin has far-reaching effects, right? We spoke about obesity, and now we're speaking about its effect on cancer cells. We'll move on, and we're on brain power. So how does sugar affect our brain? Well, I think we have a clue, right? So the studies show that after consuming sugar, our brains reduce in function. We have hindered new learning, meaning like say you had to go to school that day and try to learn something new, but you had sugar, it hinders the ability to learn something new. And definitely it causes a decrease in memory recall. So there are strong connections between a high sugar intake and the prevalence of also depression and anxiety, which we relate to brain disorders, right, or psychological disorders. What do you think of when you think of the words a sugar crash? It's exactly that, right? Depressed mood, irritability, truthfully some brain fog, right? Don't feel like you're quite right there. And definitely most people experience fatigue. Okay, imagine that not going away. Imagine every single time you have something sugary that exact list of events is actually happening. That's what's happening to our brain because of sugar. So the foods that are rich in sugar, they outright disrupt our neurotransmitters and how well our brain signals, our nerves in our brain signal. And when we're continually disrupting that, we have disorder and an ineffective function of our brain. Okay. Most of all, it's mood. Does it sometimes feel like everybody in the office is cranky? Not our office. But I've been in those environments where, everybody's cranky and everybody's a little bit moody. And sometimes that doesn't have to do with work. It has to just do with the fact that people are having sugar highs and sugar lows all day, right? Coffee with a bagel, muffin, and we're having these constant crashes. And in the meantime, we're having brain dysfunction, we're having mood and disorder and irritability. Okay, those constant sugar crashes. Are you addicted? What does that mean, addiction? So I want to actually read something to you, and I know I'm not supposed to read, but this is kind of important. Understanding, we throw that term addiction around loosely, but understanding what addiction really is will help us to understand what effect sugar really is having on us. Okay, so addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry that causes a dysfunction and characteristic biological, physiological, social, spiritual manifestations. It's reflected as an individual that's pathologically pursuing a reward and or some sort of relief because of using some sort of substance of abuse. Okay, so that's a heavy description. But what I want to do is then move on to talk to you about dopamine and then compare that definition to what's happening in our brains with sugar. Okay, so let's talk dopamine. It's our good, happy feeling hormone, right? So what happens, it controls our pleasure response. We release dopamine and we feel a sense of euphoria and pleasure, right? And it's very rewarding. It feels nice, and so we tend to want to do it again. When you eat a lot of sugar, a massive amount of dopamine is released. And you get that, that piece of chocolate cake was good, right? We all have had that, that tastes good feeling. As you continue to consume sugar, what happens is that dopamine response becomes less powerful, and you actually need more dopamine to be released to feel that, for lack of a better word, that euphoric high. Okay, so what you should know is that research has been done to show that the brains of a food addicted person, its response is exactly that of a drug addicted person. So just like that person who's addicted to a drug wants to feel that high again, that's exactly what's happening to us when we have and want another dose of sugar, right? Because we want that dopamine high. So let's get to the good stuff, right? Not all sugar is created equally. And that slide, I wish we were all like chatting, because then we can do some guesses. But let's keep it simple. And I'll start with the list of, truthfully, I want to start with the list of not so great. Let's get that for you. Okay, so what I want to go through is some of the sugars that you should definitely avoid, right? Because that's where the confusion lies. Should I have a diet this, and because it has this in it, and should I avoid that and eat honey? It's confusing, so I'm just going to give you the list. The top 3 alternative sugars that you want to avoid. This is what you've been waiting for. And this one's not hard. Aspartame. So how many people do you know that have switched from Coke to Diet Coke because they want to reduce how much sugar they're having, and it seems like such a good intention. However, aspartame is that sweetener that's used in diet sodas. So the best known sweetener, appearance is in soda. However, aspartame it's used in sugar-free gum and so many other things. So people can tolerate aspartame fairly well. They normally actually don't. Sorry, just wanted to fix that. People don't normally feel sick when they have aspartame, especially not in the short term. They actually feel fine, and some people may, but it's just a little bit of digestive distress and possibly, at the worst, migraines. But long term, the use of aspartame has been proven in studies to actually, when mixed with a common food dye, right, which is why most of your sodas are not crystal clear, they have some sort of color to them. Most aspartame is actually combined with a food dye, another food additive. And together, aspartame and food dye, food coloring, actually causes brain toxicity. So yes, that's not something that happens right away or that you can feel, but brain toxicity is not something any of us want, not in a hopes to have a soda. Sucralose, now that you may not recognize, but Splenda you may. That is what Splenda is. And truthfully, we'll just start out with how Splenda is actually even processed. Splenda is processed, sorry for the phone ring. Splenda is processed by using chlorine. So, I'm very sorry, guys. So Splenda is actually processed using chlorine. And what's really bad about Splenda is that they found that it can be broken down in the wastewater of treatment plants. Now, if that's in a chemical treatment plant, what is happening with Splenda in our bodies? Are we able to break it down? Are we able to, is there sludge in our gut because of this? There are some things you just don't want to leave to question and you want to leave out of your diet. High fructose corn syrup, I mentioned it earlier. It's one of those things that you actually might find challenging to get out of your diet because it is in everything. I mean, simple things like relish and ketchup, right? Unless you're outright purchasing those products that say no high fructose, no high fructose corn syrup ketchup or no high fructose corn syrup relish, you're actually getting a dose of that in so many prepared products. And that's actually a really big one. And we spoke about the reasons why earlier. So what you need to know about high fructose corn syrup is 2 things. One is that it plays a huge role in the way that the liver processes and stores fat. That whole non-alcoholic fatty liver thing that we spoke about earlier, high fructose corn syrup straight to the liver, it has to deal with that. It also causes major weight gain, and it plays a role with disrupting our feedback mechanism for hunger and satiety and the feeling of being full. One study has checked high fructose corn syrup and high fructose corn syrup foods that contain high fructose corn syrup, and you will find that they found that they were all laced with mercury. Now, mercury is a heavy metal. It's not something our bodies can easily get rid of, and it has a huge impact on heart disease and also some developmental disorders like autism. So don't worry, I'm not all doom and gloom, right? I'm gonna give you the try these instead list right now. Let's get this to you. Okay. So we did the Stay Clear list. We're gonna try these instead. So stevia is at the top of the list, and that's because stevia is actually a plant extract. It's extracted from the leaves of the stevia plant, and as long as you make sure that the source is clean, meaning that it's not a stevia that's been mixed with other additives, then you're got a winner. And that's because stevia actually has some positive effects, such as balancing blood sugar, balancing cholesterol, as well as playing a positive role in reducing insulin resistance and blood pressure. So like I said, with stevia, you have to try it, of course, to determine if you like it. But what you want to do is make sure you're not trying a brand that has additives. Coconut sugar is next on the list. Coconut sugar is an unrefined natural sweetener, and it contains all of the vitamins and minerals because it hasn't been refined. It does not contribute to that huge, remember the spike of blood glucose that we spoke about, the roller coaster ride all day? Coconut sugar actually doesn't have that much of an effect as long as you're using it in moderate amounts. Now, raw honey, what we need to recognize is that I spoke to you about fructose and how we don't need a lot of it and that our liver has to deal with it. So you need to know that fructose is present in honey. It's just present in very much smaller amounts than if you were to outright have sugar. And there are some health benefits to eating honey, such as promoting heart health and fighting inflammation, as well as actually in boosting your immunity. So we don't want to overuse honey, but it is a very acceptable sugar alternative. So anything that's good, right, in large amounts can be bad. So I just need you to, take caution, recognize that ideally what you want to do is reduce your sugar consumption. And if you use an alternative using the ones I mentioned, stevia or coconut sugar or honey, but definitely using them in amounts that are smaller or moderate, okay? So taking action. And that slide makes it pretty clear. We always talk about, when we're talking about cleaning up someone's diet, we make it simple, right? A whole foods diet is where you want to start. And if you look at my screen, we have a food that's whole, right? We can actually visualize that was probably picked off of a tree. Whereas the thing on the other side, it could be healthy, who knows what it's made of. But it definitely has some processing going on. It didn't get picked from a tree, dug out of the ground, shot or killed and cooked. And so it's less of a whole food as that apple. And that's kind of how you want to think about your meals kind of on a daily basis. You want to be able to determine, is my food a whole food? And that all you have to do is say, can I visualize how much processing it actually has had from the time it was grown? So some things like that cupcake, it may have once been a combination of wheat that was grown, that was ground, that was processed, then processed again because it had to be mixed with sugar and additives and maybe eggs and baking soda, and then you got a cupcake. Whereas that apple, tree, apple, hand, mouth, digestive tract, right? That's the progression, and you want to have the most minimally processed line of order for your foods. That's what a whole foods diet is. And that's the #1 way you can reduce your sugar intake. Now, you remember my story at the beginning where I discussed how I thought I had a healthy whole foods diet, but what that meant was that I was still being exposed to all those hide and seek sugars that we mentioned, that list of places that sugar hides out with funky names that we always can't recognize, like salad dressings and barbecue sauces, etc. When you switch to a whole foods diet, you want to start using things that are less packaged, right? So you're going to start with a whole food, but you want to season with fresh herbs and vegetables and basic seasonings that you know exactly what's in them, as opposed to pre-made marinades and sauces that were bottled. Because if you start from scratch, you know exactly how much sugar, if at all any, is in your diet. And that's the truth about how easily it is to take action. It sometimes may not be, what's the word? It may not be, it's ideal, but it may not be practical to just cut sugar right all the way out in that way. But start somewhere. Start choosing whole foods, and you will have success. I'm actually riding off of a high of a client that left my office. He was here about a month ago, and all he did was that clean food, nothing else, and 10 pounds of fat loss in just a month and a half. Like, that excites him, it excites me, and all he did was take out the excess sugar. We haven't even gotten to work of how all the other ways we can fix his diet. Okay, so I want you to feel empowered to just do that, to start cleaning up. How are you feeling? So I'm pretty sure I may have overwhelmed some of you. I appreciate your attention during this mini biochemistry lesson, but definitely so that you can understand some of the ways that sugar actually affects our body systems, because understanding that gives us a good idea why we should not be engaging in sugar, and sometimes just knowing is all you need. I wanted to just help you guys to know that Ocean Rock, we're always here hoping that people will engage us or at least take some of our advice, because we know that it doesn't always take much to transform. And one way that we can support you today, if you haven't already, is to go to www.thehealingbermudabook.com. So www.thehealingbermudabook.com. And what you can do is put in your name, your email address, and actually download a free copy of our book. It's called Healing Bermuda, The Real Solution to Your Health Crisis. It's for free if you do a digital download, but if you're a hard copy kind of girl or guy, you come into the office, or they're definitely available at the bookstore in Hamilton and online on Amazon. You can order your book and have the hard copy. We designed that book to be literally your step-by-step guide to improving your health. It's workbook style. It's an easy read. It's very little biochemistry. Just like I kept it light today, the book kept it light, but enough understanding that you will feel empowered to make change and have optimal healthy life. We encourage you to head on over to the website, download your free copy, and transform your life. I really appreciate you joining. Thank you for joining me today and listening through all of our mishaps, whatever they may have been. But I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to you joining us on our next webinar. We actually are going to have a live in-house seminar, and we look forward to having you there if you can join. Okay, take care and thank you. Bye-bye to you all. If you have questions, since I actually wanted to keep it on time, if you have questions, what I'd really love is if you head onto Facebook and under any of these sugar posts, or just direct message us. I will be happy to answer any further questions that you have, myself or any of the team members, if you have a question for them. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll say bye till next time.